LeBlanc.
Give him a warm welcome as he comes.
I want to thank all of you for coming. Tonight's a very special night for me, and I'd like to dedicate it to a very special person. She lived a life of no compromise. She's the reason I'm here today. She believed in a Christian education, and she didn't let me do what I wanted to do growing up, and I thank her for it. Her name is Charlene LeBlanc. She's my mom. She passed away from cancer about a year and a half ago, and my earliest memories of her was her telling me, son, one day you're going to stand and you're going to preach the gospel. And she said she was going to be here to see it. And I know in my heart she is. So, Mom, this one's for you. The name of my testimony is To Hell and Back, From Rags to Redemption. I would like to start by giving my Lord and Jesus Christ all the glory. This is not my story of what I've done. This is His story. Proverbs 22:6 says, train a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he will not turn from it. Those words echoed in my head as I jumped up out of my sleep in a cold sweat. I looked to the left, I looked to the right, hoping to see my wife, my children, maybe even my dog. Anything that would remind me of home. But there was nothing. Nothing but bars and cement and a sick feeling of hopelessness. My family, my life, my freedom were a distant memory. What had gone wrong? After all, I had been raised up in a God-fearing home. I had gone to the best Christian school in the country. I had sat under the greatest preachers of the 20th century. I had given my life to Christ at the age of 5 or 6 and received the Holy Ghost at the age of 12. What on earth was I doing in this jail cell, in the fight of my life, facing 10 years in prison and possibly being labeled a sex offender? As I lay there in this godless place, my mind goes back, way back. The year was 1976. My mother was with child, after being on birth control for 10 years. You see, she already had 8 children, the oldest being 20. The doctors had told her she would die if she had any more children. She gave her heart to Christ at a little church in Reserve, down Central Avenue, named Reserve Church. Growing up Catholic and going to that church, everyone thought she went nuts. The preacher taught that unnatural birth control was not good for a Christian woman. She stopped taking it, and 1 year later, God sent her a son. She gave me to God even before I was born. This was the beginning of a lifelong struggle to take my life back from Him. I can remember going to a dealer's house to get drugs and him telling me, what in the earth are you doing in this life? You are not like us. How about that? I go to buy drugs and I get a word from God. This is the story of my life. What did I do though? I ran fast and I ran far. I had a very good childhood. Nothing major happened to me, just a lot of 4-H and church, a lot of church. I felt like I was in church or around church more than I was at home. By the time I was 16, I had enough. And at age 17, I made the first mistake, really big mistake of my life. I left Christian school to play football at Riverside Academy. I became an instant star, playing against people like the great Peyton Manning. I thought I'd arrived. I knew it. No one could beat me on or off the field. Proverbs 16:18 says, pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. And boy, did I fall. A few weeks before our state championship game, my knee was destroyed in the play. The ride was over. My dreams of college ball were broken. Up to this time, I had not drank or did drugs. That was for the weak, I thought. The rest of my senior year passed quietly. I began to drink and smoke weed by myself. The first time I ever tried marijuana, I went to a friend's house, and I had been watching them guys smoke for a long time, and they used to act all goofy, and I was kind of down that day, and I said, man, let me go see what that's all about. So I bought me a joint, and I rode around and smoked it by myself, and I didn't feel anything. I said, man, these dudes got a weak mind. And then the next week, I bought a bag, and I smoked that. And I still didn't feel anything. But a couple months later, actually, I tried it again, and I got really stoned. And I was like, oh, that's what this is all about. My time at Riverside was not all bad. That is where I found the love of my life, the very beautiful Connie Meir. That summer, me and a few of my friends got a job traveling, and I was off to see the world. I was 18, and I was on I-55 headed north to Illinois. This is the first time the devil tried to kill me. Me and a friend left LeBlanc to drive to Arkansas. I drove while he slept. We stopped at a rest stop, and instead of sleeping, we smoked weed for 2 hours. When it was time to go, I asked him to drive. He had slept the whole ride up. We left, and I fell asleep. I was awoken by a hard stop. I looked up, and we were stopped in the middle of I-55. I looked at my friend, and he looked like he had seen a ghost. I asked him, what happened? He said, I don't know. I just woke up too. I looked back, and our bags were all over I-55, and traffic was stopped behind us. You could see we had almost gone into the other lane, and we went round and round and came to a stop back on our side of the road. God's hand was there. The medians in Arkansas are very wide. If we was in Louisiana, we'd be dead. We'd be dead. That trip lasted a few months. It got cold, and I missed my girl. I was back in reserve. Now what next? The next summer was the first time the devil tried to take my freedom. When I was 15, my parents had sent me to a mission trip to Mexico City with David Hogan, so I knew the way. Back to the summer of '95, I was always looking for fun. The kind of fun that can get you dead and get you dead fast. When my life was on the line, I felt like I was most alive. I made friends with a guy whose dad was the local mafia, and he had money and a lot of it. I went from only smoking weed to trying every kind of drug in 3 months. One day we were bored. We could not find anything to get high on. He began to tell me he had heard we can get any pill we wanted in Mexico. I spoke up. I know the way. What a mistake that was. The next week would be unforgettable. He said, I got $5 grand. Let's go. So off we went. We got down there. We smuggled thousands of pills back across the border. We were stopped twice. I don't know how they didn't find him, but I was scared to death. God's hand was there. 3 days went by. When we got back, I went to his house, and I found him hanging in the tree in his backyard from a pear tree. I walked up to him. His eyes were wide open. He had urinated on himself, and he had feces. I couldn't get the rope from around his neck, so I put the chair over that he had jumped over on, and I got up, and I was able to untie it around the branch from the tree. And when I threw him on the ground, he began to breathe again. God saved his life. He was brought to a mental hospital, and when his dad found out what we had done, he said he was going to have me killed and anyone else who might have anything to do with him getting drugs. 30 days later was my first trip into the spirit world. I had been up partying for a week on the latest, greatest thing, a drug called crank or ice or methamphetamines. I had not slept for about 5 days, and guess who shows up? Yes, it was my friend. With a smile on his face, a pocket full of hash, and a lot of money. And not to forget, a scar that went from ear to ear from the rope that had cut into his neck. We partied all night. We smoked the crank to go up, and the hash to come down. After he left the next morning, I remembered what his dad had told me about having me killed, and I began to see people who were not there. I thought the hit squad was there to take my life. I was so afraid I would not start my own car in case it had a bomb. I let someone else do it. After that experience, I swore I would never do uppers again. I was in so deep, I was starting to feel the heat, and I had to get out before I got burnt. Instead of turning to God, I ran even further. I fled the country to the island of Roatan, 6 miles off the coast of Honduras. I fell in love with the place right away. I said I was never going to return to the U.S. Or so I thought. 2 months later, my dreams came to a sudden end. I was all high on weed and drunk on coconut rum I had in a coconut shell when a letter came for me. As soon as I grabbed it, I didn't have to open it. I knew what it was. I felt something round in it. It was a gold promise ring I'd given Connie years before. It made it all the way to a Central American island. God's hand was there. All the letter read was, "Does this mean anything to you?" Needless to say, I was on the next flight home. The trip had got me out of the game long enough for me to hear God speak. I came home and settled into a job. I stopped doing drugs and started going to church. One day at work, my brother asked me, "When are you going to marry that girl?" He said, all you have done, and she is still here. She's a good one." I thought about it for 5 minutes. I went home and asked her to marry me. We tied the knot 8 months later. I packed her up and we went back to Roatan. 3 months later, we came back with our first daughter on board. I had a new wife, a baby on the way. I was broke, the game was calling, and I was itching to play. I was a little older and wiser, I thought. The dope thing had almost killed me, so the new game was the carpenter business. In the late 90s and the early 2000s, houses were going up left and right. The money was there for the taking, and I was going to get mine. For the next 2 years, I settled down into a quiet family life. I was making enough to get by. I began to smoke weed and drink at home. I thought I needed something to chill out. About that time, we got pregnant with our second daughter. Up until this time, I was working for the other man, learning the business. Now I was ready to make my move. I jumped in head first, and in 2 years, I had 15 employees and millionaire clients. I thought I had arrived for the second time in my life. After my second daughter was born, I found out the effect of pain pills. I found out the effect pain pills had on me. I could use them and not smoke or drink. I could function in public. I lost everything to those pills: my family, my health, my peace, my money, my trust. Most importantly, everyone else's trust in me. One day, I was on the way home from work, and I had a wreck that would change my life. It was a Friday afternoon. I was working in boutique, and I was living in Gramercy. Usually on a Friday, everybody's paid. It was a good week. I was shuttling a few guys to work back and forth with me, and we'd drink a few on the way home. And just so happened that week, I was extremely sick, had a bad cold, so I couldn't smoke like I wanted to or do anything. It just wasn't agreeing with me. And on the way home that day, we stopped in boutique. I bought a 16-ounce Budweiser. I took one sip of it, and the taste was just revolting. I had to throw it out the window. 45 minutes later, I was in reserve. I was coming on a new road. I was going on one lane of traffic, and they had 2 young men. One was on a bicycle pedaling, and the other was on pegs in the back, going the same direction as I was. And a truck was coming in my direction. And instead of taking the side of the road, they cut right in front of me, and I couldn't miss them. I killed one of them and injured the other one for life. After this experience, I delved deeper into drug addiction, prescription medication. Doctors were giving me sleeping pills. They was giving me